If ever there was a guy in over his head, it's Nathan McDonnell, who has pleaded very early guilty to charges of drug importation. I mean, so early, the trial is set for his co-accused, James Leen, into next year.
I mean, he actually pled guilty before he was even given a chance to plead.
He did, because we spoke about it. He sort of pleaded guilty to his lawyer, didn't he? Or?
No, he pleaded guilty to the guards. And then even the lawyer hadn't even heard he was pleading guilty, because obviously the way it normally is with court cases, people get brought in and charged. And then there's an arraignment date, which is relatively soon after they're charged.
He's like the Matt Talbot of the drug world, is he?
Yeah. Well,
he's going to be whipping himself in a cell from here on in until he gets out.
He is. I mean, he obviously just wants get it all out there. I think the bail application and the failure to get bail obviously has broken his spirits. Yeah. And he's just, as you said, rolled over.
He's just rolled over so early. So anyway, Nathan McDonnell, of course, was a very well-known Kerry businessman who owned, I'm going to have to put my glasses on now to just remember the name of the Ballyseedy garden centre.
Yeah.
And he got caught up in this extraordinary story that we sort of have owned really on the Sunday World and here in Crime World. It related to the biggest seizure in the history of this state, or probably the only, or one of the only large seizures of crystal meth, which was discovered and seized from Cork Port in a container that had been in his garden centre for a number of months while it was under surveillance by the Garda's Drug and Organised Crime Bureau. This links in to the Sinaloa Cartel and obviously to our friend Maurice O'Shea Salazar, who remains on the run, bopping about somewhere in Chile, you reckon?
No, I think he's most likely in Mexico.
Not in Europe?
No, I don't think so. No, he could be. He
Tell you about Mexico in a minute.
I mean, I think the belief is that he's obviously wanted in Chile. European authorities would probably extradite him to Chile. They'd certainly make the case that he would be extradited. So the belief is he's gone back to Sinaloa itself.
Culiacan.
Well, exactly. I mean, who knows for sure? But he's certainly, that the belief is that's where he's safest and that's where he's gone. Channel 4 actually amazingly had a piece about it last week. But
about Culiacan?
I'm
going to tell you about it now when we go on,
No, they had a piece about the use of Ireland as a hub for the Sinaloa Cartel, which is quite, again, it's one of these stories. Well, it is. I mean, it's one of these stories that we said before that if you made it up, it would sound like, as we call it in the business, a flyer.
So how does Nathan McDonnell get caught up in this? I mean, this is a guy who is rubbing shoulders with
visibly
Fine Gael.
Not just Fine Gael. I mean, he was the president of the Tralee Chamber Alliance, which is basically a business association. And in that role, he was meeting all the local politicians. So they'd meet and express their business interests. He was a youngish man at that stage. I think he was elected in 21. So
he's 43 now. So
he was in his late 30s. So quite a prestigious position. I mean, that shows how he was regarded in the town. He was one of these up-and-coming businessmen. He used to be on various afternoon TV shows going on about plants and home decorations. He and
his glamorous wife were very much sort of socialites in the area, and they were at race meetings and they were
and also
every sort of a event that was going.
Exactly. And one of those really high sort of profile businessmen, not one of these guys like the Mansfields where they're high profile businessman, but there's that whiff of disrepute also there.
Sulphur,
Nathan McDonnell was just not that type.
No.
So he was very much, I'd say...
And nothing in the family background that would link in any way to organised crime or any sort of crime.
No, exactly. And, very much his wife would have been very prominent on Instagram. Obviously, she's no involvement in any of this criminality, but just one of those kind of up-and-coming new generation Kerry men, like, the opposite to the Healy-Rae, Danny Healy-Rae type, well-dressed, well-groomed. So how he got involved in this Well, I suppose we'll find more information.
We have a little bit, because it was in
do.
February of 2024 last year that this operation happened, that the Gardaí moved in on the port of Cork, where this sort of, what they're calling a sort of a Trojan horse, which was some sort of a piece of machinery that had been, the insides had been taken out of it and it had been stuffed with crystal meth, basically.
Yeah.
And that had been stored in his garden centre, and it was ready for export to Australia. Although I do notice that the offence that he's pleaded guilty to is importing a controlled drug.
Yeah.
Well, even though it was actually on its way out of the country.
Yeah, but it obviously had been imported into Ireland. It had stayed in Ballyseedy Garden Centre in this machinery. This machinery, I think, had been designed to avoid sort of X-ray detection through customs procedures. So it had been stored there, and that's
since October of 2023.
Since October, so you're talking about 4 or 5 months. In that time, that's obviously the importation charge, and then there's a second charge, which is basically with the knowledge of the existence of a criminal gang, you facilitated the sale and supply of drugs, and because, as we heard in the bail hearings, McDonnell was accused of doing up a false invoice, basically sending this
to a legitimate Australian company.
To a legitimate Australian address. So he was also involved in that bit of it. They know it's a false invoice. He obviously knew it was a false invoice and his hands were all over it.
It's important to point out that he pleads guilty to importing a controlled drug, methamphetamine, with the value of over 13,000 euro per port. So 13,000 is a figure within the law.
Yeah.
Anything over that sort of can get a maximum sentence of X.
Well, it should in theory get a minimum sentence of 10 years. It was brought in, that mandatory sentencing was brought in after the Gilligan gang was smashed. And if you had at that stage more than £10,000 worth of drugs, you would,
which translates into the euro figure.
Yeah.
The actual amount of drugs seized that he has been caught up in is over 500 kilograms of crystal meth, valued at approximately 32 million, extraordinary amount of drugs. It's funny that 13,000, which appears usually in the court reporting, often people are up in arms and going, oh, where did the rest of the drugs go? Is that all? But it's actually just a kind of a legal
It's a technicality.
It's a technicality in the law there. So sorry, I just wanted to point that out. So this previously, the bail hearings heard that the drugs were found hidden in this shell of a recycling machine. It had been imported from Mexico.
Yeah.
And stored at his garden centre before it was transported on to Cork. I do believe that he, in sort of interviewing that, would have suggested he didn't actually know there was drugs stuffed in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the initial bail hearings heard, that he didn't know anything about it. He stored this machinery, but how would he know what was in it? But obviously that claim is now
defunct because he's pleaded guilty to it. And it's also, we were told during those bail hearings that he was due to get 150,000 euro for his part in this scheme. Not much given.
Well, I mean, still a huge amount of money. If you consider, well, not much.
Well, if you got away with it, it's a nice amount of money in your pocket. But given the losses that he has and will face into the future, Ballyseedy Garden Centre is closed. The restaurant, I think, is closed. A new business open there. He has had, obviously, a loss of earnings plus family life since he was arrested in February. And he's remanded into custody now by the Special Criminal Court on Monday to face sentencing, which is going to happen before the end of the year, I think, the sentencing.
Which is...
But he's not going to be let off lightly.
No, he's not. I mean, it's the sheer scale of the drug seizure, the fact that he, knowingly, at least knew, maybe he didn't know the exact value, but he knew what was going on, obviously, by participating in building up this false invoice. I mean, you say it's not a lot of money. And of course, in retrospect, it's a bad idea.
I mean, it'd be a lot of money to me.
Well, if you think of it this way, right? When that was suggested to him, maybe what he was told was, you're going to get 150,000, which is a life-changing amount of money. All you have to do is leave that machine there. Nobody knows anything about it. I'm sure even if they catch it, you can say you just thought it was a machine. You just have to leave it there and then on one occasion, find a company and send it to. And that's all you have to do for 150 grand. And he's obviously asked this by somebody. There's in advance of him agreeing to this, There was never any mention of the Sinaloa Cartel, the Kerry seizures. None of those people were public names. And he obviously took a chance and thought, yeah, I'll just leave it there. And 150 grand is a huge amount of money.
We also don't know if any of this ever happened before, if this was the first, if this was the first outing for this arrangement. Of course, James Leen is still before the courts, and the court has been told, seeking a trial date. So he is going to continue on as not guilty. I think he has very firmly pleaded not guilty.
He has, and he said
October next year. So it's going to a full year on now. He's going to be.
He'll have his day in court at that point. But yeah, Nathan McDonnell.
So how does it sit? Does it weaken Leen's case when Nathan McDonnell pleads guilty?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the case is not about the fact that obviously drugs are seized and obviously they are illegal. But the other case will depend on the state will have to prove the involvement of anybody else who was charged. Nathan McDonnell, as you said, he's been in Portlaoise, I think, isn't it, for the most part? So he's been in amongst really the most dangerous criminals really in the country. And he's gone from appearing on Virgin Media afternoon TV to a whole different world.
So just wanted to very briefly, because I was, one of my nighttime reads last week, or whenever it was New York Times, an article headlined, "A Cartel Double Cross Turns a Mexican State into a War Zone." And it's about this, feud within the Sinaloa Cartel, which involves Ismael Mayo being sort of tricked into basically landing before the courts so he's Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia. It was the former right-hand man, or they were equal partners with Joaquim El Chapo Guzman, who's obviously jailed for a squillion years in the States. But Garcia was sort of tricked, it said, to go to the States by one of the sons of Joaquim El Chapo Guzman. And obviously his sons, one of whom gave evidence against Guzman during his trial in Brooklyn. But anyway, the whole lot of them have gone to war, right? Yeah. And there's been something absolutely unbelievable, like 140 murders in 1 month.
Yeah.
So 140 people killed in just 1 month. I mean, the whole of Culiacan, which is where the Sinaloa is from, a little sort of mountainous village in Mexico, it is shut down. The schools are closed down. Businesses are closed down because people are literally afraid that they're going to be killed. I mean, it is an interesting article. I don't know whether you need a subscription on the New York Times to read it, but it's just extraordinary. I mean, the violence of it is beyond anything that we could ever imagine here in Europe at all. I mean, this is what it looks like when a Mexican mafia goes to war on itself.
Yeah.
And it's all about the control of this sort of multi-million-dollar cocaine narco empire. Of course, they're into not only cocaine nowadays. That's almost dinosaur to suggest it is this methamphetamine that they are pushing into the US.
And the fentanyl, of course, which was a very big part of the Sinaloa Cartel. I think
it's like gun battles, and I mean, it's unbelievable what's happening. And I mean, the idea that Nathan McDonnell is some way caught up or is a little particle of this is just...
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, like what's happened in Mexico, of course, is that it's become a narco state, as they call, where the narco gangs have enough power to rival the actual government itself. But yeah, for that to end up in Kerry, and of course we've spoken about how it does, if there's a direct connection between, the TV3 or the Virgin Media afternoon stars, there's only 6 steps back to El Chapo Guzman.
Yeah.
Not to state the obvious, we're not suggesting anybody in Virgin Media is involved in the Sinaloa Cartel, but it is amazing. And it's one of these things that shows as well, I think, that in the modern world of drug trafficking, how these organizations, which were once really locally based, including the Sinaloa Cartel, which grew out really controlling a bit of the Mexican-US border, they've all become these multi-national groups, and the movement of drugs has just become really the primary bit of business.
Now, Nathan McDonnell is going to be sentenced in December, and I think we should be there for that.
Yeah.
There's an interest in this story. There's no doubt about it. People ask me about it when they see me out on the streets or whatever. We get plenty of, contacts in from people. We were down in Kerry with the Cocaine Cowboys show, and that's all they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
It is an extraordinary story. So yes, I think we should be at that sentencing, and we'll come back. There may be some more in between, but we'll certainly be back to it then, if not before.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Niall. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.